when, because you still had a full-time job.
Still a full-time job.
When, like, what were the steps, right,
Yeah.
to get you from attending this live meetup to doing your first deal?
I paid for private coaching, small group coaching, with this guy, John. I cannot remember his last name. But we literally went to his house once a week, and it was small group coaching, talking to people, and how to do a subject to deal. And he taught us all kinds of cool stuff, like how to, instead of putting money down, how to do a promissory note, and just all kinds of just wacky ways to do it. But not only that, I bought a course. There's this great guy named Chris Kirshner, who's not in real estate anymore, but wrote probably the greatest course that I've ever read called Real Estate Autopilot. That was very foundational for me. So yeah, between those two things, we started doing some marketing and getting some calls, and you know, and that was its own scare. Like every stage is so scary. You know, it was incredibly intimidating.
So tell me about your first deal.
Okay, so so I have a job, right? Like I can't. Like, who's going to take calls, right? I'm going to send out these postcards. And at the time, so here's another course that I bought, Marco Rubel's Foreclosure Riches or something. And he had this course where you would upload your list of people and it would mail merge it. Very high tech, right? Obviously, my wife's the brains of the operation. She did that. And it would print out these letters and you would put them in the envelope. It would actually barcode them so you could, if it came back, you could scan it and skip trace them. Very, very, very revolutionary at the time. Yeah. So I had his course. I bought a lot of courses, man. And then I also subscribed to Foreclosures Daily out of Florida. So what was happening, and this is a different time, right? This is, now we're, maybe 5, 6, 7. Like there's a lot of foreclosures. Everybody's like talking about foreclosures, and we're going to buy them sub 2 and all of that. Nobody knew what was coming, but that's where we were at the time. So subscribing to Foreclosures Daily every night at 10 o'clock for whatever counties you subscribe to, your list is now online. They literally had somebody who went to the courthouse every single day in all the counties, and they would upload this information. My wife would go in there at 10 p.m., download the list, put it into Marco Rubel's Profit Finder, spit out the letters. She would lick them, stamp them, but like she did that part, and I would drop them at the post office on the way to work. So good and bad, we were very quick, we were very proactive. The bad news is sometimes our letters got there before the list pendants, and that created some interesting calls. But it is. But
what were some interesting calls?
My house isn't in foreclosure. I don't know why you're sending me this. I'm like, oh, so sorry. That's probably our mistake. Have you ever thought about selling? Have you ever thought about selling? So, another thing that they talked about at the REIA was a call center that would take your calls, because that's what REIAs do, right? They're here to provide solutions and answers. And at the time, that was the only place you got education. We did not have real estate disruptors to do this, right? None of this existed. So they talked about this company called Voice Connect out of Atlanta, and similar to Pat Live, they'll answer, they'll do whatever script you want. Awesome. So I'm running all of my calls to them. That's the phone number. They pick it up and they're like, hey, thank you for calling Bay State Investments. That was our company at the time. Do you have a house that you'd like to sell? And they would ask a bunch of questions. So literally, I remember coming home and I had 3 leads that day. 3 leads. So it's 7 o'clock at night. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking out the glass at the pool. And I remember this, a wood grain table, and I printed off 3 leads. And I sat there, Steve, and I'm like, I start comping. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. This one's not going to be good. This one's probably never going to sell to me, right? You know what's happening, right? Yeah. This defense mechanism in my brain, I'm like,
you're talking yourself
out of action. I'm talking myself right out of it. And then, this one, that's stupid. That's a bad area. Like I'm doing all of these things. And then in the back of my mind, I remember this conversation when I worked in Vero Beach, Florida as an assistant manager way back in the day. I shared an office with a corporate recruiter. This guy's name was Leo. And he told me this story about when he was a young buck. Like he was like 70, 60 at the time. So poor guy's probably not alive now, but he's like, my boss told me, pick up that phone and laden with profanity and never put that phone down. If he ever saw me put that phone down, he was going to duct tape it to the side of my head. He's like, all I want to see you doing is dialing. Right. So that's one of those things that stuck in my head. And I'm like, oh, I just got to pick up the phone and just do this. Right. I just got to do this. And no matter what course you take or who you talk to, they're like, you got to work through that initial fear, right? You have to, do that. So like, I just would just pick up the phone and start calling. So the first sub 2 deal that I bought, that wasn't a house that we bought to fix up and live in and all of that, 930 Tappan Circle in Orange City, Florida, right? So I go to this house, and this guy and his wife had inherited the house from his dad, who had passed away. Cool. 2 mortgages on the house. So I'm using Chris Kirshner's autopilot. He's got this form, this amazing form. And the idea is you go to the house, you walk around. Hey, tell me what's going on. Okay, let's do this. Let's see what we can purchase your house for. So it starts at the top, ARV, right? And then it's got all these lines and it's rocket science at the time, man. So it's like, hey, so let's talk about, this is what we think the house is worth. Let's talk about the repairs, right? So, and then at the bottom is what do you owe? And then it says what's your equity, right? Because we're trying to shrink down to what the equity is, and then we're going to negotiate off of that. So here's the out-of-body experience. I'm nervous as the day is long. I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen. We're all on the counter, and I've got this paper. Now, before I went there, this software that we had, we pre-printed out with what it thought was acceptable and what you should make the offer. So I go there, and I've got all this in my head, but we've got a blank line. I'm like, okay, so what do you think for, do we need a new roof? No, we don't need a roof. Okay, but we need to paint, right? So what do you think it would cost to paint? And every number that I had in my head, he was shooting higher. Like, I know what he's doing, and he's just trying to be really helpful. But if my number was going to be 5 and he's telling me 8, well, he's reducing his equity, you're right, all the way down the line. And then he's an electrician. I remember that. And there was this old shed out there. And I said, so what about the shed? He's like, oh man, you're definitely going to need to run power to that shed. I'm like, okay, like, what do you think that'll cost? Probably another $1,500. I'm like, okay. Like, I couldn't even spit the words out. So like, I'm like, it's every part of me is, I'm trying not to shake, and they're giving me this number. So whatever it was that we had the 2 mortgage, or the ARV, all the repairs, then the mortgage balance. And it was maybe 20,000. I don't know, whatever the number was. And I said, okay, but now he's messed up all, like I was ready to make an offer right then, but now I'm all kaboggled out, right? Like, I don't even know, I'm nervous. Like, here's what I'm going to do. I think his name was Joe. I said, Joe, let me do this. Let me go out and call my partner. And I'm not sure we can make this work, but let me go out and call my partner and see what we can do. Is that cool? Do you have just a minute? Okay. So I go out to the car, close the door, turn it on. I call my wife. She's like, how's it going? I'm like, I don't know. Really different. It's not what I expected. It's not what they told me on the CD at all. She's like, what do you mean? Like, he gave me higher numbers. I don't know what to do. She's like, well, just fix it, dummy. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay. So I think I've got it figured out. So I hop out of the car and I walk back into the driveway. And here's the way that they made the offers. I said, okay, so here's your equity, right? So we'll pay you, the whole thing was sub 2, right? So I'll pay you this much for the house in cash, right? Well, that doesn't cover the mortgage. Okay, so we know that's out. Second offer might be a little bit of money down, a couple $1,000s. I'll take over your mortgage and I'll give you this much money at the end in a balloon. And the third was like 0 down, take over your mortgage, and I'll give you more money as a balloon. So they look at it and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll do this one. I'm like, oh, you know what, man? That's the number everybody picks. I didn't even know what I was doing, right? But I'm anchoring them to I didn't even know. But I'm like, oh man, you know what? Number 2, that's what everybody picks. It's really crazy. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, okay. Do you have a contract we can sign? I'm like, yes, I do. Hold on, let me go back to the car. Back in those days, we had to carry around like these briefcases with every possible contract that you could ever have, right? Because no iPads. So we did it. We signed the contract. I did no deposit, or I did a deposit, but as a promissory note, because that's what my guy taught me to do. They didn't care. Like, it was the craziest thing ever. Yeah. Like, the whole part of it felt like an out-of-body experience. And like, I just left there like, it worked. The thing worked. They said do the thing, and the thing worked. It was crazy. So that was my first one.
Guys, I'm looking at the analytics, and right now half of you guys are not subscribed. That is unacceptable. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another episode.